Hello, and welcome back to Telling the Bees, my special dispatch podcast. We are going to be covering the 8 weeks of Love is Blind, along with some sociological analyses of media. I'm going to go over a bunch of stuff today, actually. So, this week we're talking about American cheating, finally, for those of you who have asked for it. We're talking about the alt-right pipeline, we're talking about Q, we're talking about Candace Owen. But before that, the Oscars were last night, so I just wanted to touch on that briefly because I was having this conversation this morning, and I'm really sad about Miss Demi Moore losing to Mikey Madison. Like, I loved Denora. I thought it was really good. I was, my ears and eyes and heart was open to the conversation that, sex workers were having about the film. So I don't want it to sound like I did not stand with them and I didn't know what they were saying. Obviously, I will respect voices who actually work in those spaces. But I liked the movie. I thought it was really interesting. I thought it was well done. I thought the Cinderella story was beautiful and up until it wasn't, right? I thought everyone gave really electric, incredible performances in it. I thought it was a very, very good portrait of the curdling of the American dream and the way that this girl was like savvy and smart and sexy and interesting and still found herself being the victim of, people who were whose class status was above hers, which could seem like kind of a really obvious and basic story, but I thought that it was done so well because we had never seen it done in an environment like this or a space like this. So I was kind of riding for it up until Demi started getting real traction. I think a couple of months ago when Demi started winning a bunch of awards, obviously the Golden Globe speech just sort of cinched the narrative for her. So in case you don't know, The Substance is a horror movie about a older woman who's 50. She had this fitness show on, sort of an NBC X base. She is fired the day she turns 50 by Dennis Quaid, and she then receives mysterious packaging, which will allow her to sort of live out her youth again. But it's really interesting because instead of her becoming young again, a younger version of herself is born, and she sort of watches her from afar. They have to trade off, right? So 7 days in the young body, 7 days in the old body, and the film keeps it kind of murky if they are one consciousness or not. Over and over again in the film, they keep saying, remember you are one, remember you are one. So it's not like Demi is living out her youth as Margaret Qualley or Margaret Qualley as old as Demi. It's kept kind of weird and unclear. The entire movie sort of operates on dream logic. The movie is sort of operating in this really interesting framework of the ageism conversation that we've been having in Hollywood. So Death Becomes Her on Broadway is about this right now. We're seeing this with Gypsy. We're seeing this on TikTok, right, where I talked about last week the politics of ugliness and the way that if you are not beautiful, you are sort of punished for it on TikTok, especially, and the way that they think on the app that, the only thing that you are worth, the only thing that you're good for in life is to be beautiful. And if you're not beautiful, then your life sucks. And it's just a really weird way of thinking about yourself and your life and everything that you have to offer the world, right? It's depressing a little bit. And so The Substance, I wrote about this. I will link to it in the show notes. I wrote about this in Inputs and Outputs. I said that it's sort of taking incel logic where it's not questioning any of these like overarching sociological concepts, right? It is beauty equals power, youth equals beauty, youth equals power, and not really questioning it, right? And obviously it's a horror movie, so it's sort of meant to take these questions head on, and the movie is very, very graphic and very not subtle. It takes all of these and just runs right into the road with them, but it's not supposed to be subtle. You're supposed to sit with it and say, okay, getting older as a woman in this society sucks, and the way that we treat women sucks, and we have to have a real conversation about it. And so all of that is to set up this idea where now the sort of two goddesses battling for the Oscar this season were the ingenue, Mikey Madison, and the older woman who's sort of having a comeback, right? Demi Moore talked in her memoir about how all of her roles were sort of based on her body, were based on her sexuality. She has spent years and years and years obsessing over her body. She talks about all of the roles that she's taken that only allowed her to sort of exhibit one side of herself. And this role, while she's still very, very body focused, is now sort of contending with the idea of her as woman, her as older woman, and her new positioning in Hollywood, right? She's having this great comeback narrative that the Golden Globe speech was capped off with by saying, you can do anything if you put your mind to it, and like, don't give up on your dreams just because you're getting older, right? It was this beautiful moment that was then sort of undercut by the Oscars saying, okay, but she's so young and she's so pretty, we have to give her the award, right? And the Oscars have this problem of giving the award to younger women. If you look at Emma Stone, Brie Larson, there's dozens of very young women who have Marlee Matlin was 21 when she won, right? The Oscars love giving very young women the award. They don't love giving young men the award, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But there is this very established pattern and this very established history of the Oscars sort of saying, we love the hot new thing on the block. We love this very, very young girl. And it just is sort of depressing that the substance was literally about this. And they were like, okay, but we're still going to give it to the young, pretty girl, right? And obviously, this isn't meant to undercut Mikey's talent. I just felt that Mikey is going to be back. She's sort of like an Emma Stone. We're going to see her over and over again. She's an incredible actress. She really fully embodied Honora, and I think that she is stunning and incredible and very, very, very good at what she does. I just don't feel like Demi will have this chance again. And maybe that's my own bias, right? Maybe this is literally what we're talking about, that this great comeback narrative was sort of built for her, and now we have to see if it's really a comeback or if it was like a one-off thing, right? Michelle Yeoh didn't disappear into the great ether after winning a couple of years ago, so that's also a serious conversation where we thought Michelle Yeoh, this was her last chance. We're never going to see her again. Kate Blanchett is nominated every couple of years, and Michelle Yeoh's been acting. She was in Wicked. Was she good in Wicked? She was there. She was present, and that's all I'll say on that. Timothée Chalamet lost to Adrian Brody. He lost Best Actor. Timothy's had an incredible press run. I'm actually going to do a TikTok about it in a couple of days. He was on podcasts. He was on YouTube shows. He was hosting ESPN. He did it all in an attempt to like build goodwill with the audiences. The movie was good. I don't know anything about Bob Dylan, and I will never think about Bob Dylan again, but it is fascinating to see how hard he went for it and how much he wanted it. I did a video on TikTok a couple of years ago when Bradley Cooper was like really campaigning for the Oscar, and I said that I'm from New York. I don't like when you can see people try, right? It's a little bit off-putting. It's a sort of like a flop sweat energy where if you want it too bad, it like repels people. And for some reason, we didn't see it on Timmy. He said it very plainly when he won the SAG Award last week. He said, I want to be one of the greats. And I think there is something endearing about him. Whereas with Bradley Cooper and Leonardo DiCaprio, I'm one of the only people who remembers how desperate and weird Leonardo DiCaprio was when he was campaigning for that Oscar. Until he put himself in that bear, he was going to do anything to win. He was doing a movie every year until he got that Oscar. And I said, okay, girl, please relax. So good for Adrian. I did not see The Brutalist. I'm not an Oscar commentator. This isn't my job. I'm doing this for fun. So I did not feel compelled to see Miss Brutalist. It will be super honest with you guys. I will never watch that movie. I got plot details from a friend, and I know that it's 3 hours long, and I value my time. I fear I need my 3 hours. I'm sorry. I can't do it. His speech, Adrian Brody's speech, was madness. It was chaos. It was insanity. I was very, very shocked that no one did anything, right? Like, there was a point during the Oscars where they literally cut someone's mic and they didn't the director of Amelia Perez, they didn't let him speak at all, honey. They said, that's enough. That's enough out of you. Well, obviously, because we got that moment of the musicians, the people who wrote the song when they won the best original song for El Mal. Camille got up there and started singing Amelia, Amelia. And then when it was the director's turn to speak, the mic was off. The mic was off. They said, you need to go. We've had enough of the three of you. You can exit stage left or right. And they did. They exited. They did not do the same for Adrian, even though it was the second to last award. And some would blame him for I think third to last award, because then it was Best Actress. Third to last award, and some would blame him for Hulu cutting out because they went so over with his 5 minute long speech after Conan said that they weren't going to waste our time. He's facing some backlash. Zoe Saldana won, the first Dominican to ever win. I was very, very happy. I cried a little. I don't love the answer that she gave when that Mexican journalist asked her about Mexico and the people of Mexico and what she thought about, the film sort of disrespecting the Mexican nationals and the very real situation in Mexico with femicide and the disappearing of all of these people. Zoe Saldana said, I'm sorry you feel that way. That has nothing to do with me. This movie is good and we made it with good intentions, which unfortunately is not a good answer and is not the media trained answer. I would have answered something differently myself. I wish her an ounce of luck. I was writing for her because she's Dominican, but with this, I can't speak to that. I also wanted to touch on the slate of celebrity deaths we had last week. I don't know much about Gene Hackman, unfortunately. He was a little bit before my time. He was 95 years old. I've seen him in a bunch of movies, but I don't have like an emotional attachment to him. I do, however, have an emotional attachment to Ms. Michelle Trachtenberg. May she rest in peace. I was very devastated when I saw the news. I grew up on Harriet the Spy, as like every millennial did, right? I'm not special, but I grew up on Harriet the Spy. I thought Georgina Sparks was one of the best characters in Gossip Girl. I thought she was very real and lived in and just deliciously mean. If you follow me, you know that I'm a huge Buffy head. I have loved the show my whole life. when I first started working. I was working retail. I was like 19 years old, and I bought all of the DVDs. I thought I was going to rewatch it last year actually, and one of my friends told me not to because there were too many episodes. So yeah, it's kind of weird timing that I would have been almost done with a rewatch now if I had started it last year. But yeah, I loved Michelle. I was very sad to see the sort of turn that she took the last couple of years. I wanted to shout out, if you are a Buffy head or if you aren't, Buffy is streaming on Hulu. So if you wanted to watch her two best episodes there, Conversations with Dead People, where she sort of is terrorized by a spirit and she wants to speak to her mother who has passed away, and Potential, also in the last season, season 7 of Buffy, where she believes that she is the new Slayer, or she will be a potential Slayer, and she sort of contends with the fact that she was special and then she wasn't. And then I'm not going to go into the Buffy lore, there's way too much there, but Dawn was very special and then she was sort of rendered human, and then she's dealt with that for the rest of the show, with the fact that she was no longer this incredibly special human. And yeah, the episode is incredibly beautiful. It's really well done, and it's I don't want to say it's one of my favorites of the series, but it's definitely one of my favorites of season 7. Moving on to the topic of this week's episode, we are talking about American cheating and the alt-right pipeline. TikTok, a couple of weeks ago, there was a conversation about gossip and the alt-right pipeline, and how a lot of people are sort of being funneled into this alt-right pipeline by following the Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni situation, which I will not talk about, only because I honestly can't keep up. Every time I look, there's a new article, there's something going on, someone is suing someone. I made a video about it and it got a million views, and 99% of the comments were furious Baldoni defenders. So I am tapping out. Good luck to everyone investing themselves in that drama. But I thought it was a really interesting question, right? So, like, gossip leading to the alt-right pipeline. I wanted to sort of position it with something that I talk about all the time, right? This idea of American cheating. And in case you don't follow me, American cheating is my term for the American cultural reticence around bringing up when two people met via cheating, usually celebrities, because they're the people that I have access to data on. So when celebrities meet via cheating, whether they are both married to other people or one of them is married to someone and the other one isn't, if they stay together, then people don't really bring up how they met, right? And we see this is very famous with Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, with the main stars of The Americans, Miss Carrie Russell and her husband. We see this right now with Hugh Jackman and Sutton Foster. We see this with Ewan McGregor and Mary Elizabeth Winstead, right? People that I've come for over and over again in videos. Ariana Grande, Ms. Ariana herself. And it is a very, very sort of public thing when it happens, but then it's just portrayed as like a normal love story. And we're seeing that. We've seen the sort of media sanitization of this with Ariana Grande and Ethan Slater. I was on a podcast talking about this a couple of months ago. If you want to go listen to that, it was the Go Touch Grass podcast. A great episode, if I do say so myself. But yeah, the media helps sanitize these relationships, and this is all to do with American cultural norms. I say that because America is so puritanical, right? We are, well, Americans, not me. I'm not from here. But Americans are descended from Puritans, and this sort of Puritan vein runs through the country and the way that we conceptualize a lot of things, right? So the WASP cultural norm is to never bring up something that's upsetting or rude or tacky or gauche. There are so many rules around etiquette and what you're allowed to say and what you're not allowed to say, right? And I've talked about this in videos when I talked about the right to comfort, which is in the cultural tradition of white cultural dominance, people will often not want to address very difficult conversations, right? So we saw this in 2020 with Black Lives Matter, and I'm sure that every single person listening to this has had an experience with this of some sort, where if you bring up something that is seen as inappropriate or rude, white people especially love to make it about you, right? They will flip the switch, they will flip the script, they will say, why are you being weird? Why are you being tacky? Why are you bringing this up? You're making everyone uncomfortable, right? The status quo must be maintained, and the comfort of the group is more important than the comfort of the individual, right? So if you are seen as being someone who is feisty or causes trouble, you will be excised from the group, right? And we see this a lot when you read about, there's a sort of phenomenon that happens with black women at work, where they say, you are the great black hope of this organization, and then if the black woman actually has suggestions to change the way things are done, they will make her the bad guy and throw her out of the organization, right? And this has been studied by sociologists. I talked about it with the Rachel Kirkconnell and Matt situation a couple of months ago, where people were saying, well, don't bring up the fact that she dressed as a slave owner's wife or a Confederate wife. And I said, well, I think I will bring it up, actually. I think that I will bring it up as often as I can, because it's very weird that, I mean, it's weird that they dated. He chose her, but I'm going to bring it up. I'm not dating her. I said, no, it's weird. I'm going to bring it up. Sorry. And a lot of white people said that I was being inappropriate, and I said, okay, well, that's your business, that's your prerogative. So talking about American cheating, I got really sidetracked there. American cheating, we have an American cheating happy ending update where, if you were following a couple of years ago, the Good Morning America drama, Amy Robach, TJ Holmes, Marilee Feibig, Andrew Shue. If you don't know any of those names, I'm so sorry. 3 years ago, well, 2.5 years ago, December of 2022, Amy Robach and TJ Holmes were caught having an affair. They were both anchors of the third hour of Good Morning America. They were, exposed for sleeping together while they were both married to other people. Something that goes very often unaddressed in this story is that TJ Holmes actually had a pattern of behavior and was sleeping with many women at the ABC office. But, it's fine. Nobody talks about it because he and Amy got together. American cheating. So Amy Robach was married to Andrew Shue of Melrose Place. For my Melrose heads, I stand with you, I see you, we ride, we rise. Billy Campbell, he wasn't a great character, but he was very sweet and very cute in the first two seasons. Amy Robach cheated on Andrew Shue with TJ Holmes. TJ Holmes cheated on Marilee Feibig with Miss Amy. They were caught. They divorced their spouses. They got together. They started a podcast in December 2023. I never heard about the podcast again after their cheating scandal. They said that there was no cheating, but obviously no one believes them because they were literally caught. It was sort of an interesting example of American cheating because the media did cover it as a cheating scandal. And I think because it was a workplace situation that got really messy, people were very, very sort of tapped in and tuned into the reality of how they met, right? There was no sort of hiding the fact that they were both literally married to other people. They met at work. They were having an affair on the set, on premises. You can't really hide that. Whereas with a lot of these other situations, people sort of are more eager to place it or hide it under the rug. I also think that because they're not real celebrities, right? They are hosts of Good Morning America. They're not necessarily Brad Pitt and Angelina. People feel much more comfortable bringing up the fact that they met through cheating and their messiness. So 2023, Amy and TJ get together, and it's very sad. Everyone is divorced at this point, and at some point we find out that Andrew Shue and Marilee Feibig, the exes, are dating. They are now living together. 2 years later, they are moved in. They're very happy. They say that they don't want to get married for obvious reasons, I'm sure. But it's interesting. I wish that TJ and Amy were on hand to give a sort of tidbit or a quote to someone, but it's fascinating to see that these two ended up together. People always bring up Shania Twain in my comments, saying that this also happened to Shania Twain, that her husband left her for her best friend and then she married the best friend's husband, which go off queen. I didn't know it. I wasn't around, or I wasn't paying attention when this happened, but I love it. It's interesting to think about American cheating with regards to, Puritanism and conservatism and the way that people talk about these things in this country, right? The way that gossip sort of ultimately becomes a tool for oppression or a tool for good, depending on how you look at it. I've always been of two minds about it, right? I don't pretend that my interests are purely highbrow. I come at it from an academic standpoint, but I also love mess, right? I love being messy. I'm sorry. I love to gossip. And I do have the academic credentials to back it up, right? I do a lot of, well, I did, not anymore, but when I was in grad school, I did a lot of research on marriage rates and cohabitation and the way that millennials are sort of reconfiguring their lives due to the economic crisis that we're in. But also, I think cheating is a natural part of that because I've always been fascinated by the way that celebrities conduct their personal lives and the way that some people are able to get away with bad behavior and some people aren't. And I wrote about that on Substack as well. I will link that in the show notes. But yeah, I do think it's interesting that some people really do believe that all gossip is evil and all gossip is like a tool of the devil. And this has been covered extensively in the normal gossip podcast, so I don't necessarily have to go into that. But when you think about the gossip being the tool for the alt-right pipeline, it's a little bit more interesting because I think for me, American cheating is less about the actual act of cheating, like the sin of them stepping out on their marriages, and more about the story, right? Sociologically, it's interesting that American cultural norms hold so strongly that, again, the protection of the group is more sanctified than the protection of the individual, and often the spouses, right? Let's say Andrew Shue and Marilee Feibig, what a great name. I can't stop saying it. Marilee Feibig will often be sort of left to the wayside because what people are really interested in now is the love story between TJ and Amy, right? The fact that they are now together becomes much more interesting, becomes much more juicy, becomes much more of a scandal and a storyline than the actual detritus, or that's mean to them. They're not detritus, but the actual human lives that are hurt by their actions, right? And I think for me, maybe I am coming at it from an academic lens and I'm able to sort of justify my messiness, but it is something that's always been interesting to me. It's something that I've written about extensively because I think the media being so complicit in helping them write the love story or the so-called love story is the most interesting part, right? It's showing that if you have enough clout in American society, you can sort of do anything, right? And we can even talk about this with Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez. That's American cheating as well, where he got caught cheating on Mackenzie Bezos and he left her and he's now marrying Lauren, and Lauren is a celebrity. She's going to space, right? Like, people don't talk about how they met because it's gauche, and the fact that it's seen as gauche is what interests me. That being said, I would be remiss not to talk about the fact that this country is extremely conservative still to this day. I think that a lot of people think that because, people talk about like play parties and, we're having a rise of polyamory and a rise of this and a rise of that, that the country isn't conservative. But think about who is talking about these things. Think about the way that they're still portrayed in the media. It's seen as salacious, it's seen as othered, it's seen as messy, it's seen as weird. It's not necessarily being welcomed with open arms, right? There is a puritanical streak. I was going to post a video about Lily Collins, or not Lily Collins, Lily James, and her affair with Dominic from The Wire and The Affair. Great show on Showtime if you haven't seen it. But I got tagged in that comment and I said, oh my God, am I perpetuating like misogynistic gossip, misogynistic puritanism by sort of bringing up the fact that she was hooking up with this married man? So I didn't post it. I think I still might, because I think it's interesting, and it's actually kind of an interesting cultural analysis on how she survived a cheating scandal unscathed, because I mean, she then went on to star in that Pamela Anderson Hulu show. I don't know how great that was. I didn't watch it because the reviews were bad, and also Pamela Anderson was very hurt by it and devastated, so I didn't want to participate in her, that salacious story, something that was done without her permission. Not a good look for the people involved, I will say. Back to the question at hand, we do need to talk about the pipeline, the gossip pipeline into the alt-right, right? Because I do think that there are sort of grifters operating in these spaces, right? Candace Owen has made the Blake Lively situation her raison d'etre. She wants it to be the most important thing that she's known for. Now she will make it her mission to destroy Blake Lively at all costs, and it's a little bit weird, right? But then when you see that she's funneling people into other content pipelines where she's like, watch my video on this, where I talk about this, instead of just her videos on Blake, it's more easy to understand why people are consuming more content that they normally wouldn't have consumed by people who they normally wouldn't consume content about. And sorry if that's convoluted, but I'm basically saying, right, if you're just trying to keep up with gossip and you're trying to keep up with the Blake Lively situation and Candace Owens keeps popping up on your page, you're much more likely to keep getting videos from her, especially with the rise of algorithmic social media and YouTube and TikTok, right? They're going to keep feeding you this content, and before you know it, you're going to be Q. Now, I'm joking about that last part, but it is interesting because I do think that the blind item culture, in case you don't know, blind items are anonymous morsels of text gossip that are submitted to publications, and they say legally they can't say who it is or they'll get sued. So it's created this sort of weird, murky underground where a lot of things are alluded to in blind items, but they're always allowed to escape of accountability because you don't know who they're actually about, right? This is Dumois' entire operating ethos, where she's allowed to sort of say and do whatever she wants because she's saying, well, I didn't say it, someone else said it, and I didn't say that it was the celebrity, right? Blind item culture has, I think it was much better in the early odds. I think it was better on Oh No They Didn't. I don't know how good it is now, honestly. I don't read them anymore because I think that a lot of stuff is at this point just being made up, and I think too many people are too into them. But blind item culture is basically Q culture, right? It's this idea that you have the secret information, you are the actual keeper of the facts and the keys, and everyone else is dumb. You're the smartest person in the room because you know something that no one else does, right? It's this idea of question everything. Everyone is lying. You're the only one who actually knows the truth, because whenever someone brings up Will Smith and Jada Pinkett, you're like, everyone knows that they've been open since the 90s. And it's like, okay, sure. It's not necessarily that you have the answers. Is it an open secret? Is it stuff that everyone knows, right? There are lots of blind items about lots of people that I will come across and I'm like, yeah, that tracks, or I've never heard this before, right? And I do think something I used to believe, I don't believe it anymore now that blind items have gotten so weird in the post-Dumois culture, but I used to say, like, where there's smoke, there's fire. So if I hear it 3 separate times from 3 separate people, I'll believe it. And there are a couple of very, very salient rumors that I've heard for years. I'm not going to repeat them because I'm not going to get sued, but that I've heard for years. And it's like, yeah, I've heard it from a bunch of different people. I do believe that this is like something that's out there, but it's not necessarily something that's going to be talked about in public. And I do think that this idea that you are the smartest person, that you are the one that knows something, I do think that there is a correlation between conspiracy theories and like powerlessness and the way that people will sort of glom onto these theories. I will link an article that I read in Vox about conspiracy theories and how often people who, aren't the smartest will sort of lord them over other people and say, well, I might not know about medicine. I didn't go to med school. I didn't go to law school. I'm not in Hollywood, but I do know this and I do trust this, right? And it is a way for them to exert some level of control over their environments. It's a way to exert a level of control over their lives by saying, I might not be a doctor. I might not be a lawyer. I might not be a seamstress, that Alyssa Edwards quote, but I do know what's going on and I do know that everyone is lying to me. And I do think that if you start to mistrust everything, it sort of breeds a natural mistrust of the human condition and it makes you crazy. I'm sorry. I cannot sugarcoat that. I think Q people, obviously, that's a very, very, very far end, but just looking for clues, looking for ideas, trying to piece things together, like sort of creating your own alternate reality where you are the Lord and you know everything and everyone else is dumb. It's not necessarily a picture that is a great picture to paint. Let's just say that. In case you don't know how I feel, I say Occam's razor. The simplest solution or the simplest answer is usually the correct one. And that's how I feel about most things, right? I have a sort of natural distrust of conspiracy theories. I have a natural disinclination to believe them. I don't know what it is. It's me being built different. It's the same way that I always say that I would never join a cult because I just wouldn't. Like I don't like people telling me what to do, quite honestly. So I just would never find myself in that situation. So yeah, I'm built different. I don't believe a lot of these blind items. I don't believe Dumois. I believe that a lot of people are just making stuff up and sending it in and they know that they can get away with it. If there was like a more established or more respectable or respected blind item institution, then maybe I would believe them. But even that article about Crazy Days and Nights that I will link, I'm always mentioning articles, that was in Vulture a couple of months ago, he was also nuts. He was going through a divorce. He was like being sued within an inch of his life. And like when you read the article, you'll see what I'm talking about. This is not someone that I would necessarily trust with secrets and information. Yeah, let me know if you guys have any comments or questions on any of that. I feel like I covered it in a way. There's so much more that I could have said. There's so much more that can be said, but I think that my opinion is pretty clear. I do think that there is a sort of natural pipeline there. I do think it's dangerous. I do think that there are grifters operating in a way to sort of funnel people into their content, and I don't believe that they believe everything they're saying, right? I don't believe that like Ben Shapiro and Candace Owens are actually that concerned about Blake Lively being like a bad person. I think that they just want to say whatever they want and they want more people to consume their content. And this is an easy win, right? This is something that gets a lot of attention. Whenever I do my charisma videos, whenever I do my star studies videos, people love them because that's the easiest way to get attention in our society, right? Like it's the easiest way to get engagement in our society on social media to talk about celebrities. It's just very easy and therefore they're sort of indoctrinating people into their beliefs. And I know that we don't talk a lot about Q anymore, and maybe I just am bringing up the wrong conspiracy theories. I can be corrected. You guys can correct me in the comments, but there definitely is a contingent of people who are now believing all sorts of things because Candace Owens is telling them. And Candace Owens? This is the person that you're going to trust? This person's nuts. I feel like I went pretty long there. That was abrupt. Moving on to the White Lotus, I don't have a ton to say about this week's episode. I think that the obvious most interesting part was my queens, the gossiping friends, and their political skin. A lot of outlets are covering last night's episode, basically just saying that this was very controversial. I've been seeing it on Reddit and TikTok all day. People are very mad about the political conversation. In case you missed it, Leslie Bibb's character, Queen Kate, or former Queen Kate, her little Bob, the most sinister of the three gossiping friends, said that she voted for Trump. The conversation was set up really interestingly. They were sort of triangulating one another, and we've been waiting for the moment where Jacqueline and Lori sort of team up to talk shit about Kate, right? We've seen all the other permutations of the shit talking triangle. So now we needed to find out what would make them turn on Kate, and it was politics, right? Jacqueline is a actress from LA. Lori is a lawyer from New York, right? These are both coastal elite cities. And I think Kate has a little bit of a chip on her shoulder about moving to Austin. She derives a lot of her social status and privilege from who she married, right? She married a rich guy. They live very well. She serves on boards. She serves on charities. I don't believe she works, right? It's very clear that she is a very ladies who lunch type, and they're living in Austin, and they specifically say that they moved to Austin. So they're part of this red wave of people who moved to Austin after they left California or wherever they left from, but a bunch of people moved to Austin when Elon Musk did. I think they made it a point to mention that they did not they're not from Austin, right? They're not from Texas. She specifically moved there. It's revealing a lot about the three characters. It's revealing a lot about the ways that we can judge one another and what we'll judge one another for. Because I think with Jacqueline and Lori, they were both being judged for things that were very superficial, right? Lori was the most superficial. When she was criticized, she said, the other two women said, she looks haggard, she looks tired. They criticized her parenting. They said, why would she raise her kid in New York? Other two women then moved on to Jacqueline and they said, she's vain, she's shallow, she sandblasted her face. Her face looks waxy. Again, superficial. But this is now moving on to the moral. We're now moving into moral and ethical dilemmas where I think that the judgments will get a little bit meaner and they'll start cutting a little bit more, right? The idea that Kate, their friend who they've known her whole life, is now married to this Republican man who is voting for Trump. You know, I made my views very clear on TikTok. It's hard to remain friends with someone when you know that they are voting for someone who's racist, homophobic, transphobic, misogynistic, xenophobic, right? I would not be able to remain friends with someone who sort of invited this energy and this demon, this monster into their lives, right? Like campaigning for him, voting for him, whatever degree of support it might be, it's a little bit terrifying to think that I know you and I've known you and you could do this to me, right? Like, especially I'm a gay man from New York. My parents are both immigrants. I'm Afro Latino. Like, there are so many of my identities that would be compromised by this administration. And I have friends who are trans. I have friends who are undocumented. Like, it's terrifying to think that the people that I'm close to could do this, right? It's seen as a sort of betrayal. And that's why Jacqueline and Lori are like, what the fuck? They look at each other. The face acting in the scene is incredible, right? They're looking at each other. They're like, what on earth do we do in this situation? It's dangerous. It's potent. It's real. It's real life. And I think Mike White deserves a round of applause for really bringing this very, very serious situation and this very, very well acted scene into the show because it's so salient to so many people's lives right now. So many people have lost friendships and relationships and parent relationships to Trump that it would be kind of remiss not to talk about it, especially again, he's been sowing the seeds by saying she lives in Texas, she's married to this guy, they're very rich. It's unsurprising that she voted for Trump. And what isn't surprising to me is her refusal to talk about it, right? So, sort of tying into the things that we talked about at the beginning of this episode, the right to comfort. Again, she is fighting for her right to remain silent. She is fighting for the right to say, why are you making it weird? Why are you talking about it? You're being tacky, you're being gauche, instead of actually facing up to the criticism, right? And I said this on TikTok. It's interesting that people who vote like Kate want to say whatever they want and never ever face any consequences for it, right? They want to be celebrated for making these decisions. They don't ever want to actually have to own up to saying or doing the things that they do or say because they want to be celebrated. They want to be coddled for making an inappropriate choice, or I call them norm breakers. When you break a social norm or a social contract, people aren't going to clap for you, right? You're not necessarily going to be celebrated for being the one to say the weird thing or the inappropriate thing. But these people, they want to say the weird thing or the inappropriate thing and then be celebrated for it. An example is with the cashier discourse a couple of months ago when I said, it is a little bit rude to not say hello to someone standing in front of you. And then people said that it was actually anti-capitalist praxis to be rude to everyone. And I said, I don't think that's true. I called them norm breakers, right? Because they're saying, I don't have to be nice. I don't have to be polite. I don't care about human society. I don't care about being nice to other human beings or maintaining the social fabric or the social order. And I want to be celebrated for it. They not only wanted to not be criticized for it, they wanted to say that they were leftist icons and they were actually dismantling capitalism by being rude to people in suburban Coles. And I said, okay, sure. I'm not going to argue with them, but I know that I'm right. This is a perfect example of the right to comfort where she, again, just absolutely refuses to take any accountability. She uses her identity as a weapon right before the conversation when she says, well, I'm a woman, to like to refute their points against religion. We saw actually something similar happen on the Giggly Squad Reddit a couple of days ago. This is so salient. Mike White is literally psychic, where someone on the Giggly Squad Reddit, which if in case you don't know, Hannah Berner and Paige DeSorbo from Summer House have a podcast. I'm, for some reason, in the Reddit, even though I've never listened to an episode. Their podcast Reddit is now undergoing some scandals because Paige has been accused of cheating, and they recently, a couple of days ago, they were like, don't talk about politics. One person said, don't talk about politics. And it was interesting because people in the comments were like, it's so fascinating that just like the three gossiping friends, you are a privileged white woman who is saying, I don't want to hear about politics, therefore none of you should talk about it, right? She literally called the manager on her own Reddit and she said, this makes me uncomfortable. This is supposed to be my safe space. Let's never talk about it because I don't want to see it. And she rightfully got packed up. A lot of people were like, some of us are people of color, some of us are immigrants, some of us are queer, some of us are, non binary, whatever. Why should we not talk about politics because you don't want to hear it, right? It's something that is, again, privileging your privileged identity over the identity of other people, privileging the things that you care about over the identity of other people. And I think that this is something that's, again, the rise of algorithmic social media has made it so people can think that they can just unsubscribe from things that they don't want to see. Like, obviously, you can ignore stuff if you want, but going into a Reddit and saying, guys, I don't want to hear about this, stop talking about it, instead of just ignoring it and like muting political posts is peak Karen behavior, I fear. I'm not someone that calls white women Karens, but I do think that this is a perfect example of Karen behavior where she was wielding her privilege as a weapon by saying, I'm not affected by anything that's going on with this administration, so you guys should shut the fuck up. And everyone was like, you shut the fuck up, right? Like, we are all affected by it in various ways. And you not saying how you're affected by it as a woman is your problem. Moving on very quickly to Rick seeing himself as worthy of saving with the snake motif, I was surprised by that because just last week he was talking about how he was nothing and he wasn't worth anything. So I'm not sure if we're seeing a little bit of growth there or if we were just trying to hammer home the snake motif. He did finally show that he cared about Chelsea, thank God, but to what end? That poor girl, she got bit by that snake. I don't know where that plot line is going. I think that they're just teasing in breadcrumbs to show that he does care about her. The Scorpio Aries conversation made me laugh where she said Scorpio so secretive. It is interesting that Amy Lou Wood is very interested in astrology. She talked a lot about it on the White Lotus podcast, the official podcast. She said that she found out everyone's star sign, which is hilarious. I actually should find out her star sign. I will do a little bit of research after this, but Scorpio so secretive. Great line. I love that the prequel theory is over. Thank God. We're putting a lot of these god awful theories to rest. We now know from the Chloe conversation that Greg does have a dead ex-wife. Belinda now knows. We saw it in the preview for next week that she's going to confront him. Thank God. I'm ready for this storyline to really kick off. And I'm actually more happy that the prequel theory was debunked than I am that we're getting actual movement on the death of Tanya. R.I.P. though. I didn't realize what happened to her leg. They said she only had one leg when they found her. What happened there? Timothy again saying, I don't take drugs. You know I don't take drugs. I'm really curious about what they're setting up there. People are reading a lot into Victoria's dream. I had a dream that the water came up to the house. Their house from North Carolina was in Thailand. I thought it was fascinating. I do think that there is a motif there. There's an element there of the sort of water coming for them, the present danger, and instead of running away from it, you're sort of letting it overtake you. You're being powerless to stop the what's coming to you. I think that that's a pretty obvious metaphor for their financial situation and what's going on there. It's fascinating that Victoria is the one that's having the dream versus Mr. Timothy. I don't know what's going on with Piper. I'm ready for that storyline to also kick into high gear. She's just kind of hanging around. I know that she's going to give us a Buddhist transformation at some point. I thought I clocked the book that she was reading this week. I thought that was really clever. We know that Mike White loves hiding clues in books from this previous season or from season one. From season one, we could intuit a lot about the girls based on what they were reading, Sydney Sweeney and The Friend. And so I think that he's definitely doing that again with Piper reading these Buddhist monk texts. The last thing I'll say about the episode, Guy Talk is obviously getting fired. Very briefly on Love is Blind, these 3 episodes, every single episode is worse than the episode before it. I am actually quite shocked at how bad this season has ended up being. I will do a ranking when this is over. So I guess next week I'll do a ranking of all the seasons of Love is Blind, but God, I'm suffering. I'm being punished. I'm being punished for my hubris. I wanted to do the special dispatch podcast on Love is Blind and White Lotus, and now we got the worst season of Love is Blind ever. Again, bringing up the Trump stuff again, everything is political. Everything is political right now. Ben and Sarah are obviously not getting married. They're not aligned on values. When she was sitting in the church, she was completely over it. She was fuming. She looked like she wanted to die. And I'm not saying that is, and obviously that's not a representation or a reflection of what happens when you're in church, but she was not happy to be there and she said it. She said, I don't think I'll go back there. I will go on holidays and I'll go for him, but that's not someplace that I actually want to spend time. Her sister is completely over it too. You can tell that all of them sort of know that this is counting down to my counting down to madness and nonsense. And I'm ready for it to be over. Devin in Virginia, again, having the Trump conversation. He's a Republican. God, she's ready to wrap it up. I don't know if she will leave him, though, because I do think that there is a situation where women will stay with their more conservative partners and sort of drift rightward. There's research on that. That's not me making that up. There's research there. So I hope that she doesn't do it. It's just so sad because she is so much hotter than him. I'm sorry, I know like, it's Love is Blind, but she's so out of his league on every single level, intellectually, religiously, morally, ethically, sartorially. It's just bad. It's bad. Again, it's interesting that both of these people aren't having these conversations where Sarah had this conversation and it was a sort of cop out where she stayed with him even though she knows that he doesn't care about Black Lives Matter or have the best opinion on the LGBTQ community. Those people, as he said, she still chose him, whereas Virginia is now 2 days before the wedding finally asking him about his political views. And like we should have known from the prenup, he was obviously feeling emasculated. He was obviously feeling like he shouldn't have to sort of devote his life to paying off someone's debts, even though she's going to pay off his debts. There is some weird element of machismo there, and I could have told you that. We should have, I was going to be really mean there, and I stopped myself. Dave and Lauren finally break up. Thank God. I was ready for that to be over. I made a video last week talking about how he's obviously terrorizing her because he is a bad man. He's repugnant. He's morally repugnant. He just was punishing her for being a modern woman and having casual sex and creating this weird Madonna whore dichotomy in his mind where he can't marry her because she hooked up with someone that he knew. And it's like, this city isn't big enough for all of you. All of you went to high school together. All of you know each other. Who gives a fuck? Who cares, honestly? Surprise of the season was that Molly was a girl's girl, right? Lauren ended up terrorizing her, but Molly ended up being a good friend to her, and she said, I stand with you, and Dave fucking sucks, and I can't believe that both of us picked him, and they had a good little moment there. That was sweet. The final thing I will say about this week's episode is Madison being mad at Mason. Girl, please. Like, she's mad at Mason, she's mad at Alex. I can see her being mad at Mason because he wanted to sort of have his cake and eat it too, where he wanted Meg to be there for him while also keeping Madison waiting in the wings. And then when everything shook out the way it did, all four of them ended up with no one, and then Mason and Meg immediately got together, which, like, sure. I heard a rumor about a possible relationship reveal at the reunion, so we'll see. I won't spoil it for you guys. Madison, I defended you a lot. I still don't think she's a villain. I just think she's like a little bit insecure and a little bit mean, and who isn't? No, who isn't? I wish her luck. I think she's obviously going through something. I think she's obviously not dealing well with the situation. The whole thing with Alex, just meet me in the airport, just give me a hug, just give me a hug, was obviously incredibly odd. The allegations about him are coming out fast and strong, so I want to know if he was at the reunion or not. And obviously, I don't think that they'll bring them up if he was there, but it is interesting to think. I really would love to know and give you guys actual analysis there. That was a little bit more of a recap, but I'm curious to see how the season shakes out next week, how the weddings shake out. I can feel my energy draining. I could feel my spirit deflating the more that I think about the season of Love is Blind, and I couldn't do it. I'm sorry. The episodes were so bad. I had to like really power through them. I couldn't lock in the way I usually do, and please forgive me for that. So yeah, that's everything this week. I feel like we covered a lot this week. Oscars, American cheating, the alt-right pipeline. I said the word Candace Owens 400 times. The White Lotus, Love is Blind. A lot going on here. I did not give a book recommendation throughout all of these conversations. So here's my book recommendation for the week. I just saw an article about it last week. I would recommend Andrea Dworkin's Right Wing Women, which was just republished. It got a review in the New York Times. It was something that I read when I was in school, actually, when I was in college, when I was in undergrad. I read Right Wing Women, and I think Dworkin is brilliant. I will say, I do think she's aged badly. I do think she's a little bit of a rad femme. So if there is negative stuff out there about her, tell me, and I will not recommend her again. But I do think that it's worth understanding the way that privilege sort of warps the minds of conservative women, right? They are materially invested in upholding patriarchy. They are materially invested in upholding their status, and there's a sort of depression there where they know they will never overcome, they will never overthrow the patriarchy, so they align within it, right? They marry these guys, sort of the Kate from White Lotus situation. They marry these guys, they are their wives, their mothers. They really, really hold onto their status in society because they know, or they believe that their status is like sort of, it's a sort of demographic destiny, right? Because they are women, they're never going to sort of break free from the chains of patriarchy. And the saddest thing is that they are also the ones who are turning against other women and like keeping them down. I should look up some more. Until I write about American cheating, there are no books on American cheating, so we'll leave you with that. But yeah, that's my book recommendation for the week. Stay tuned next week. We're going to be talking about robots, and thank you for listening to Telling the Bees.